Hey folks, Dustin Siggins with Proven Media Solutions. Welcome to another episode of Cracking the Comms Code. And today we're going to talk about why PR, where no one dies if a press release goes badly or if an interview is late or whatever, why it feels like the ER for so many PR practitioners. My wife is a former ER nurse. She worked at a level 2 trauma center with gunshot wounds, car accidents, drug overdoses, all of it. Why am I more stressed than I think she was ever work stressed, even though she worked night shift? And so we're going to talk about it today with Tiffany, who was in-house, launched an agency, and feels like maybe there have been a time where she was part of the cultural problem at her company. Dave, where he's gone from a company that was 20 people to over 100 and with multiple offices now. And Evan, who's done the reverse trip that Dave has taken, was at Fleischman Hillard, is now a consultant. And we're going to talk about everything from culture and how culture starts at the top, but also individual responsibility, because you can't just blame the boss if you're not taking responsibility for your own stress levels and managing your own work responsibilities and personal responsibilities. So Tiffany, Dave, Evan, if you can briefly introduce yourselves and kind of where you're coming from on this topic, we'll kick things off.
Sure. I can start off. I'm Tiffany, as you mentioned, and thanks for having me, Dustin. I'm the
Yeah.
CEO and founder of Kite Hill. We are a B2B tech PR agency. We do have a headquarters here in New York City. It's where I am now, not too far from the Bull if you've been down this way. But I actually started off, as you mentioned, in my career. I spent a lot of time in-house. I was not big agency side like our two other folks here, Evan and Dave. I was the head of communications for the Huffington Post. I had an opportunity to work underneath Ariana Huffington. I also had an opportunity to be in like very early days music industry at LimeWire during some pivotal years as we went from downloads to streaming. And a lot of that experience, certainly, you asked not only about an intro, but our belief on kind of the topic of balance. And we've all heard it's PR, not ER. Is
Right.
really just understanding that in-house perspective, gaining a lot of experience in PR. And then I think from those foundational years, like all of us, you start to think about what environment do I want to be a part of? And I'm sure the other panelists will talk about this too. And what environment do I not want to have? And that was something that really, when founding an agency and launching Kite Hill was my North Star, it was about the people. It was about culture. And it was about having that value of balance just as much as valuing agility and a lot of the passion for the industry itself. I'll kick it to Evan. You want to go next?
Dave just came off mute. Go ahead, Dave.
Hi, everybody. Dave Dziuk. I'm a managing director at Narrative Strategies. We're a strategic communications public affairs firm with our headquarters in Washington, D.C. As Dustin mentioned earlier, we are expanding. We have an office in Florida, West Palm Beach, Florida. We have one in New York City, and soon to be expanding, I think, in the future. So, my background being in Washington, D.C., I caught the politics bug early. I was doing a lot of political campaigns and worked as communications director on Capitol Hill for a few years, and then kind of was really burnt off. Just a very unhealthy lifestyle if you don't do it the right way, or maybe if you do it the right way, it's an unhealthy lifestyle. And a friend of mine said, "Hey, you know what? Why don't you think about the public relations world?" And they were working at Edelman PR at the time, and a few months later, interviewed there, wound up at the agency side of things, and learned. That corporate America and trade associations and nonprofits need just as much help as members of Congress and legislators as well. So really got my feet wet, got to see what corporate communications and public affairs was for the first time. Left Edelman to go in-house at Koch Industries, company based in Wichita, Kansas, but I was leading communications focused on public affairs. So it was kind of the intersection between government affairs, legal, and the community affairs team from a communications perspective. And then after 7, 8 years there, I got the bug to see, hey, you know what? And this is, what Tiffany was saying earlier, trying to find that right fit when it comes to culture. Going back onto the consulting side of things, ended up at Narrative Strategies, which was a firm, 20 folks at the time. We're now over 100. So it was a challenge to say, hey, get in early there, see if we can help build this up, build it up the right way, and learn from some of the mistakes that I've seen made in the past. When it comes to shaping firms and communications teams. So it's been exciting. So a pleasure to be here with you all today. So I'll kick it over to you, Evan.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, really excited to be here with you all. I'm Evan Boyer. I'm the founder and CEO of Leaders PR. we're a B2B PR firm based here in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I live. I've had an agency career spanning almost 15 years, everything from boutiques to mid-sized firms. And then most recently, I had been out on my own for a year, but prior to that, I was SVP at Fleischman Hillard, which is one of the largest firms in the world. And I led some global agency accounts there, 2021 to 2025. And then you called it quits a year ago in July, went out on my own. So my experience pretty deep in financial and professional services and tech and construction and real estate. And then a lot of crisis and issues management in there, which I'm sure we're going to talk about today as we talk about stress. So, part of my journey has been growing up in the agency world, leading teams, and now just trying to manage things all on my own, certainly with little bits and pieces of help along the way. But it's definitely a different experience than how I learned it, but also learning a lot about, like we're going to talk about how to deal with stress and what creates it and how to avoid it and all the things. So looking forward to diving into it with y'all.
And I was annoyed, Dave, a year ago. Not really annoyed, but I was so proud of myself for coming up with this phrase. Well, I thought I came up with it, PR, not ER. I'd never heard anyone else say it. And then a year ago, Dave, Evan, and I were chatting, and here's Dave sitting in front of his log cabin on vacation saying, yeah, PR, not the ER. And I was just like, man, I thought I invented that one. And then here, Tiffany just really drives it home by saying we all say that phrase. But I really got thinking about this in the last few years because this is my first agency, and we've gone from one person in 2018, 4.5 people a year ago. Now we have 11, including part-timers. And last year I was working 60 hours a week for 5 months, right after our fifth kid was born and right after my mother passed away. So it was a lot on my shoulders. And then this year I read the book Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell, I think his name is, on how a founder needs to hire to replace their own time on things. And I'd already been doing this in a certain way, but what I started doing was really looking at my time and said, am I setting the right tone for our culture, right? I mean, because I think it's the uncertainty factor that brings a lot of stress to PR. Will the prospect say yes? Will the client actually give us the information we need? Will they accept the narrative? Will the pitch go well? Like, there's all this uncertainty. Once you place it, will the marketing team spread it the right way? Will it be behind the paywall or not? There's so much uncertainty in PR. And I think that drives a lot of stress. And so for me, we're still a small agency. When I started really expanding, I said, what do I need to make sure that our culture has less stress? So I tell everyone who's full-time, about 6 or 7 of us, don't work more than 35 hours a week. Because right now we have 2 people on vacation. If everyone's at 40, suddenly we're all at 50 for 2 weeks, and that's not a sustainable culture. But something I haven't been doing as well until recently was don't email on the weekend. Tell everyone, you don't have to read my emails, you don't have to respond to them. And 2 or 3 people told me, it triggers me to think about work. It triggers me to be more involved. Wait till Monday morning. So I'm learning a lot about making sure that I'm not, as the leader, accidentally creating that stress culture. And so Tiffany, you talked in our prep call about how you were sort of part of the problem there. And I would love for you to talk about that transition that happened and bringing the pandemic in as you did during our prep call.
Yeah, well, I think that was in reference to, it's such a good point, Dustin, of the difference in mentality of how you approach work and how you're checking in, even in how you used to operate. And we were talking about earlier agency environments, and I would check in around the clock, right? There was the expectations, even being in smaller agencies, being in-house, where you didn't give yourself an opportunity to unplug because you were a part of a culture that was always on and there was a lot of pressure. And that's certainly things that I saw when I mentioned take with you what you want as a great culture and don't bring what you don't want to be a part of your culture. So when I was thinking about Kite Hill, agencies, we're businesses of people. So that culture piece as a founder is a part of that North Star. And it's even unpacking kind of the framework for how we think about a stressful environment. Like, what's the responsibility as you, the founder, versus the individual when it comes to being in PR? And certainly as a founder, then how do you reset? What's that opportunity? It's looking at the culture that you form. And I had mentioned, think even more post-pandemic, we're embracing more maybe not work-life balance. I don't think that truly exists, right? We're all parents on this call too. We know like how hectic life can be, right? Sometimes you're all in one way and another. But also just thinking about like how do I create the best environment? And oftentimes it does come from the top down. What is the responsibility you have as a leader within the business? So as a founder, you're thinking about culture, you're thinking about a structured process, you're also codifying kind of what that looks like in terms of the organization to make sure that you're creating the best possible environment. So much so that post-pandemic at Kite Hill, we added one more value to our existing values of balance to really drive that home, that this is something that we really want everyone to be able to embrace, to be able to unplug, so you can take those vacations and then come back like ready and refreshed. And then the other piece, which we can unpack later, is just being in PR, the realities of the business and being a very deadline driven business, right? Like, how do we as individuals manage against that?
Evan, you talked about how when you started, and then you also talked about a team that you joined. So I'd be very interested in kind of hearing how kind of Tiffany's journey was in-house to agency to post-pandemic. You had a similar story though with different triggers.
Yeah, so like I said, I've been agency pretty much my whole career. So when I started out and first job out of school, I really didn't know any different. So I joined the crisis team at the agency that I was working at, mid-size shop in Atlanta. And we just dove right in. We're working on a crisis all the time, in addition to the account work that we had. And it was very much always on. Now I'm to date myself a little bit. I had a desktop at this time. So the desktop was in the office. And like if you really, really wanted, you could go home, dial into the VPN and get on your laptop. But like there was still a little bit of that separation early years. It quickly went away. And then, the way that the iPhone progressed and everything, like you never really had a moment off. And so the teams that I joined after that, it's just like progressive levels of increasing responsibility, increasing expectation, and increasing stress. I mean, to the point where when I joined Fleischmann in 2021, I was a VP, and some of the things that Tiffany was saying, really rang true for me because I had a manager at that time who just like was always on, always, and it was really difficult for me or for other people like in that orbit to be like, okay, well, I can, if this person can't take time off really, then I shouldn't really be able to do that either. And that's a very slippery slope. So it's one of the things that um, like I grappled with certainly through COVID and post COVID. And I think I've only recently come to like a place where I can make better decisions around how I'm setting boundaries and using my time.
Hmm. So Dave, you're the only not business owner here. I'd be very interested in how you, as an upper level manager, and you talked a year ago about how when you bring new people on, I think I don't remember the term you used, but it was someone not in their chain of command helps mentor them and they can be their go-to person. Be very interested in how that culture, that contributes to culture, to make sure that people feel like they're not being shoved into the fire hose.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for remembering that, Dustin. So we call them accelerator teams
Thank
here.
you.
Um, I think what's important about that, and I think just in general, what Evan and Tiffany were talking about earlier, about culture. It's giving people the space, I think, ultimately to be adults at the end of the day. So when our firm was created here at Narrative Strategies, I think the founding partners said like we want to create a place that's doesn't have any of the same traps or any of the same pitfalls, or we want to actually enjoy showing up to work and make sure that we build a culture that allows for that. So ultimately, we treat everybody as an adult in terms of like, hey, if you need to leave the office early, to, go walk your dog, or you have a dentist or a doctor's appointment, or, let the HVAC repair person in, absolutely. You can do that, but you also know you have deadlines, and you know that, the work doesn't end all the time at 5 o'clock ultimately. So it's something that we just really empower folks to kind of be their own, owner in a way of the work that they're doing, and how they deliver against that. So that's really a big part of it. And I think ultimately, when it comes to leading teams, and you mentioned the accelerator program earlier, the whole point of that is a lot of firms in the past, a lot of traditional PR firms are set up by, say verticals. Here's the energy vertical, or here's the healthcare vertical, and you might get hired as an associate or whatever the entry level position is on that team, and you're an associate on the energy team, and that's all you ever know and all you ever get exposed to. You may work for there may be another firm on that, but you don't know all your colleagues or who you're working against because you're only focused on that. We believe very firmly in being generalists here at Narrative Strategies, especially early on. And I think we've seen as we've gotten more in the weeds and granular with certain clients that we're working on that, like, okay, we need more expertise when it comes to well, how does a drug get approved through the FDA? It's like I
Oh
don't,
my
I don't know
gosh.
that, but there are
Don't
people
talk
that
to me about the
do.
FDA
So
right
we
now.
have
It's
to,
our biggest account.
but we
Oh,
have to ultimately hire for that. So we're doing that. But
right.
again, we want generalists ultimately. And what accelerator leads do, it allows somebody who are outside of like their client teams, me serving as a managing director, they can come to me to work through any issues that they're having, talk through anything that they're struggling with, that they're seeing on their accounts. And it's just we're responsible for walking them through their review process. We have reviews twice a year, so it kind of gives them more just informal, kind of like, hey, how you doing? I want to be your advocate here internally, so you don't get lost internally, but just so you know that you have someone here who can advocate for you, that you can talk to about anything. So I think that's a big part of our culture, and has proven successful here so far.
On the point of just one build on that, I thought that was awesome. One on the point of treating folks like adults, I think that one of the things, and I don't know if other people who've worked agency can relate to this, I certainly struggled with it for many years, was feeling like I was always on the hamster wheel with the billable hour, right? That no matter what I did, yeah, you knew we were going to talk about this, Dustin.
I didn't, but I'm laughing because we've
Yeah,
talked about this.
yeah, I know we
Yep.
have, but no
Yep.
matter what I did, it was always like, did I fill out my timesheet and get that
Mhm.
8 hours or more? They wanted to see, I worked at agencies where they told us, we want to see more than 40 hours billable on your timesheet. So what does that mean? You're actually working 50, 55 hours most weeks.
Mhm.
Like that's a lot of work, but there's not an escape from it if that's the way that you get paid. So, conversations with Dustin that I've had in the past and a number of other people, that's, one of the things that I'm trying to do with my shop is move away from that model. And man, has it made a huge difference for me and my level of stress to be able to say, like, hey, I got the work done. I'm an adult, I got the work done, and now I can go do other things that are important to me in my life rather than sitting there at 4 p.m. on Friday and saying, man, I've only got 37 billable hours in the system. I better like, churn and burn here before somebody says something to me on Monday morning. That's a really, and I think being part of that system, we almost like, create more stress that's just unnecessary. Again, Dustin, to use your word from your post yesterday, it's unnecessary.
You bring a good point, and Tiffany, I'd like you to and maybe David talk about that because I've written a piece called "Why Hourly Billing Should Die in PR," and a year ago I had a show episode on the same topic, and really what it boiled down to was I summarized it later as why AI will finally kill hourly billing in PR because it is such an unhealthy part of the culture. You're fudging your numbers, now you're being dishonest. Now your client isn't sure if you work the hours or if you actually get the job done. You then have to spend time checking the box and watching the clock rather than being a productive member of the team. We've always done, we pay when we were smaller, did a lot of project based pay. We always bill our clients by project. But so like people actually say, well, how much do you charge per hour? It's like, I don't know, because if we land the pitch in one email, we made $1,000 an hour. If it took us 10 pitches, we only made $100 an hour. But we're gonna bill you our price, and Dave knows that. We've done a little work with Dave in the past, and so I'd be very interested, Tiffany and Dave, how you've seen hourly billing impact culture and how you've been able to see the structures that you've built at your companies that help reduce the stress that Evan's talking about and also create a better culture of the type that Evan was talking about.
Yeah, sure. Happy to weigh in, Dustin. I think you make a great point too. So I'm someone who is very much active in various aspects of the PR industry. So I'm a part of the
Hmm.
PR council. I'm a part of
Right.
the CEO cohorts, which are great. It's just a lot of learning and exchanging of ideas. And I
Hmm.
founded Communications Week. I'm still on the board there. So what you're pointing to is a trend that I'm seeing just across the industry too, just moving away from hourly to there's a lot of talk about how do we go to value-based billing? How do we think
Yes.
about outcomes? There's not
Yep.
only the communications industry, but a lot of consultancies and professional services are thinking about, and AI is one of the big drivers. I mean, it's kind of been an undercurrent for a while to move to value-based billing, but this is definitely like one to watch for the PR industry. I don't think we're quite there yet, honestly. If I kind of peel back the layers of the
Mhm.
onion, I think in principle, it's the right journey for us to be on, right? Because you mentioned, I mean, some of the work you do, if you're, bringing strategy and your experience and you can accomplish something in an hour, it's worth so much more than that hour's work. It's about the outcome and what value did you drive. And that's certainly the direction we're pointing in. Even to share candidly and candor's of value too at Kite Hill behind the scenes we still look at staff allocations and hours, and we're looking at that, as a
Sure.
typical agency would. We're doing that structure. But, it also, I keep saying it comes from the top down. Like, how do you manage your team and how do you communicate that? So we're talking to our team members about like, this is a guideline. Also, tracking hours is a part of just healthy how we run a business, how we make sure we're not over
Sure.
servicing clients, right? So you want to
Yep.
be able to catch that too, so you don't, so you could balance both ways, and then another part of it too is talking to the team like we don't want to over service, we don't want you to be overworked. So the more we can have that candid conversation, and if you're under it's okay, if you're over it's okay, but let's talk about where the work is netting out so that there's a balance of responsibilities across the team is the conversation that we want to be having for sure.
And Dave, just before you jump in real quick, I'm going to break my 2 second rule. Shocker. Um, but Tiffany, I want to just make sure I distinguish. On the show, I think 2 weeks ago, we had someone from Finn and a couple of other agency folks talking about hourly. And when they mentioned hourly, I was like, oh man, hourly sucks, or stinks. And they dialed into what you had said. Because again, we're an agency that's very small and we're still learning a lot. And what they distinguished between was hourly billing to the client and hourly tracking for the team for the
Mm-hmm.
purposes of servicing and other things. And Jake, who was a senior account executive at Finn, said, if I'm supposed to put 20 hours into a client, they don't care if it's 23 or 17, given the boss doesn't care. It actually helps him track, okay, why did I overservice? Oh, it was because it was award season. Great, we're fine, we're good. It actually said it was very helpful for him, even though they don't bill hourly, their internal tracking. So I want to make sure we distinguish between those two factors, which I failed to do earlier.
Yes, that's a great point. Yeah, and but that also it gives you leverage in a different conversation with the client, right? So if you're using it,
Right,
that's how we use it for internal tracking. Just as an agency owner, you could look at
right.
different parameters as to how you're setting that, how you're working with the team.
Hmm.
It also, I think, I went on the same journey as you, Dustin. Like I started my own agency, especially like not having the background that Dave and Evan came from. I
Right.
had similar agency experience, but I didn't have the operational experience. So I had to get
Yep.
sharp on managing an agency pretty quickly. And that's why I reached to the PR council and a lot of those resources and kind of got like, where are the goalposts that I need to look at?
Mhm.
And that helped me to think about better allocating against a team, right? Because smaller agencies that I was in, it was just like take as many accounts as you can, right? Like it's like the
Right,
Wild
right.
West.
Yes.
As opposed to if you have operational rigor, you can make sure that there's other parameters like safeguards, if you will, that you're not overstaffing or understaffing on certain accounts. So I think it's really helpful. And to that point, there could even be a conversation of leverage with a client. Let's say you've like massively overserviced and gone over hours because of a crisis, which inevitably can happen. Then that gives you a different point and conversation to have. It's like
Right.
how do you anticipate some of these things in the ongoing relationship?
Sorry, Dave, go ahead. I just want to distinguish between those two things.
No, thanks, Dustin. That's an important point and what I was going to bring up. So it seems like since I last worked at a firm over 10 years ago, I remember the model and I remember tracking every 15 minutes of your time. What were
Oh,
what was it being, spent on ultimately? And I think a lot of the clients were asked for hourly billing. That's rare now from what we've seen, at least. We have a handful that requests, they want to go the hourly route. But that's an exception as opposed to the rule. And something when narrative started, we weren't doing the hourly. We actually didn't have a system in place to ultimately track people's time too. It was a new company. It's just, hey, here's the work. Let's service against it. But then we soon realized it's like, wait a minute, how do we know that if we're doing this effectively, if we're doing it efficiently? Are we over servicing? Are we under servicing? And we put that apparatus in place where, we all of our employees, we do weekly timesheets, but we just allocate, and this is only used for kind of internal purposes, not for sharing with the client. Where are we spending our time? What percentage is being, allotted for what type of work? If and we can measure against, whether they're hot on, if it's 5 weeks in a row, what's going on there? If it's cold, what's going on there at the end of the day? And we can have these conversations and make these adjustments in real time. So it's been a really effective tool for us, and it also helps with, I think, morale, because if you're seeing that there's one person on one account that's really just over really putting in a lot of time, and others on the account might not be, it kind of sees who's stepping up, who isn't necessarily. We can kind of understand why, and just gives us oversight over every single account that we have and how people are working against those accounts, which has been helped us in terms of, I think, employee, I think, productivity, but also morale.
Tiffany, you mentioned earlier when you started your agency being able to have all these resources. I didn't know anybody in PR except for Dave. Dave and I met when we both were in and around Capitol Hill 15, 16 years ago. And when I started my company, I think I knew 15 people in the PR comms space in general. And 2.5 years ago, we switched our entire business model from going after the founder, CEO type of client to actually servicing the communications industry. That's our model now. So we're the subcontractor for agencies, consultants, and work more and more with in-house teams. But one of the things that I've been very glad about was early on, my business partner is a serial entrepreneur, not in the PR industry. The downside to that is my father, my business partner, has never been in a service trade. So he's always been in home services, commodities, innkeeping, sports marketing. So still doesn't know what an op-ed is, I don't think, 8 years in. But a year ago, we were hiring for our first director of content because I was still editing every piece, looking at every piece, and pitching every piece. We decided to hire a director of content and not hire the second candidate. I got off the phone with the second candidate, called my partner, and said, I think we have the finances to hire this person because he's freaking awesome, and I don't want to lose him. And he said, my thinking on that. So we hired somebody for a significant salary for us without knowing how we were going to use him. And it's been fantastic because he actually runs our biggest account now and has taken that account from a solid 5 figures to we just hit 6 figures with them for the first time. And now I'm not running that account anymore. And so I do want to talk about, going back to a little bit what Dave mentioned on the accelerator program, is how do you bring good people in? I'm rereading the book Good to Great for the third or fourth time. And one of the big principles is not get the right people on the bus. It's not get a direction, then get the right people in that direction. It's get the right people first, get them in the right seats, and then keep moving. But I'm very interested, Tiffany, Dave, and Evan, how looking at the right people so they can be adults. You don't have to manage them, but also how much do you look at rejiggering? I had a colleague this week say, Dustin, we were talking through my workload, and you're right, I need to be better here. If I can drop this meeting on my schedule every week, that would be very helpful. And so there was some pushback from somebody else. Well, could that hurt team culture? And so I had to make a decision as the leader, which was more important. I decided to let that person drop the meeting, but that was a dynamic decision we had to make to look at what was most important. So again, I'm a little over talking here, but I'd be very interested in how that getting the right people on the bus so they can be adults, to Dave's point, so you don't have to manage them. How do you determine who the right people are for your culture? What are the key aspects?
Yeah. Well, I think, your question is kind of on the journey, even starting with building a team and mentorship. And I've been very fortunate to reach around me and have mentors that have been in PR and have, been outside of the PR industry. One of my early mentors was someone I worked with in the ad tech industry, and that's one of our big practice areas. And I think I've never been afraid to ask a lot of questions or even have like uncomfortable conversations. Like, what about this in my business? How do I get these people right? So I've always been very much about like building a great team and reaching around me to better understand that. It's certainly, I'd actually say it's more of an art and not a science in getting the right
I
people on your
know.
team, right? Because it's like knowing that in this industry, yes, we're supported by technology, there's more opportunity with AI. It's still, as I said before, we're a business of people. We've always, looked at the hiring process and have had a balance between both the hard skills and the soft skills. and looking at a values fit as a part of that. So,
Hmm.
and we are an agency that lives by our values. We have a Slack channel for shout outs that's by values, where we talk about agility, candor, passion, balance as a part of those. So, I think it is looking at not only what are your values, how's that shaping your culture and like walking the walk, but that is a big part of it. Like as a part of the vetting process, really understanding like, how is this person going to work? How can
Sure.
they help me uphold
Hmm.
the culture that I've created that I know is great and one of the best in the
Yes.
business? Because anyone who's building a team also knows if you hire the wrong person, that can quickly poison the well. So I do
Yes.
think it's something to be very thoughtful of as you're building the team.
Hey, can I jump off that? So to your question, Dustin, about like how do you bring the right people in the door? There's no real science. You can't be 100% confident ultimately.
Sure.
It's
Of
something that we
course.
like to ask. I think is proven, I think one of my favorite interview questions is like, tell me about your first job. Like, what was your first job in high
Ooh,
school
ooh.
or that? And we've gotten some great responses. We had somebody who, drove the Oscar Mayer weenie mobile and stuff like that. And it's like, well, what do you learn from that? Like, how do you
Right.
do it? Because it
Brilliant.
just gets out of this world of, it shows like what's your kind of your background, your character, your kind of mentality on facing things. Ultimately, it's interesting. So, it's a good question. Gets out of you know loses some of the stiffness, this interviews and resumes sometimes. It just kind of breaks that ice. But when you do bring people into your culture, I think in a rather short amount of time of like whether this was the right fit or not. And it's not about skills ultimately. It's about that
Right.
culture fit. I mean, where I worked previously at Coke Industries, it wasn't about like you'd always want to hire somebody who was, had the right kind of culture, the right mindset. We could teach them the right skills, but as long as they have the right kind of values in a way that embrace that you're looking for in hard work, that's what's ultimately most important. And I think when we talk about culture, it's an easy word to say, but I think, at Narrative, we talked about accelerator teams, we talked about the generalist nature of how we staff accounts and all that, but we're also flat in terms of the partners are just as hands-on and working hand in hand with the associates. They have access to the partners. It's not like this, just like, oh, you don't go up to that floor. That's where they all sit and make decisions at the end of the day. So if you see a partner that's on a call at 8 p.m. at night, servicing a West Coast client, you're kind of bought into that as a junior employee to be like, oh wow, okay, they're not just telling me to do this, they're doing it as well. We're part of this whole thing ultimately. That's kind of exciting. So you lose some of that like, oh, I can't believe I have to work at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock,
Sure.
on this thing because you're kind of all in it together. It just really goes down to kind of the kind of expectations and excitement that you build as leaders in the firm that you work at.
So,
Dave, do
Evan,
you think that's nature or nurture mostly with finding those people?
Yeah, whether we just have extraordinary luck doing so, or like how like if people,
Like,
working, yeah, whether
yeah, so, yeah, I guess hiring, do you feel like you're finding those people who are naturally have that ability to, find, structure or balance, not be stressed out, be eager to be on the West Coast call at 8 p.m.?
mm,
Or do you feel like there's a component of that that's like a little bit like, hey, here's how we do things here, and you're teaching them?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both in terms of when you're here, you're seeing kind of how it gets done. You're learning that it's not just words, you're seeing actually people live it out. That helps. But I also think as we expand as a firm, a lot of the recommendations that we get to hire folks are coming from people who already work here. So they already know that, like, hey, you know what? Who's looking for a job? This person who wants to leave this trade association, or they want to get off the hill, or, I worked with this person. I met this person when I went back to my college and they're graduating. We should really talk to them and consider them ultimately. So we're kind of just the people that we know are doing great work here. You kind of associate with those folks, I think, in kind of your maybe some of your more personal time as well. So it's kind of like we've created this kind of cycle where we're able to kind of just get those kind of recommendations and bring them on board, and boom, it's a nice fit. I think
Hmm.
so. We're lucky in that way.
Yeah.
I want to jump in real quick, and I'm breaking my 2 second rule for the second time. It happens about 3 times per hour, so per show. But what I find really interesting here, you said, Tiffany, that this is an art, not a science. I think it was you who said that. And what's interesting is when we led the conversation, and even our prep call, everyone here said, yeah, you don't want to be the leader who is sending weekend emails, or the leader that Evan talked about who was wanting to be helpful, but was really setting a tone of, I must grind all the time. And yet, when Dave's just said the partner's on a call at 8 p.m., everyone nodded and said, yeah, that's what we want too. It's a really interesting, it could almost be seen as a dichotomy here of the partner, sometimes you need to be on at 8 p.m. and sometimes you don't. And most of the time you shouldn't. So, Evan, you have a very young kid at home. You are a one-person shop. How do you look at that and say these are the scientific, so to speak, the concrete, hard facts about what I need to be on a call at 8 p.m. so that you can follow those guidelines when you're tempted to head towards working it? Like I just actually this week implemented a practice. After work, I'm taking my laptop, I'm putting it in the backpack, and I'm sliding it so I cannot see it because I realize I'm looking at my computer 3 to 5 times per night after dinner instead of spending
Mhm.
time with my wife or doing the dishes or working out or whatever. Nothing important is going to happen. I'll check one time at 8:30. That's my brand new practice, but it's taken me 8 years to get
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think any of us can really say that we're there. We've arrived in that way.
there. Sure.
If we're being really honest. But it's always going to be a work in progress. I will say I saw something from Simon Sinek recently that I thought was really interesting on kind of the point that we were just discussing, and he cited some research. It was like a AI workforce firm. I forget the name, but he said, the most effective people are not the people burning themselves out at one end, and they're not the people who are setting hard boundaries between 9 and 5 on the other end. They're the
Mm-hmm.
people who are sometimes willing to work nights and weekends because they believe in the mission and the vision.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I've thought about that a lot since I first saw it, probably several months ago, and how I can personally get closer to that and be that person. Running things on my own, I think one of the things that I've come to just realize and accept is I'm going to work more. It
Yep.
matters more to me. Like the
Yep.
business is all on my shoulders. I just am going to work more. I don't have a huge problem with that. And I know that like a typical week for me is going to be Sunday night to probably Friday morning. I'm grinding a lot. I do a lot of like I wake up early and try to get stuff done before my kids get up. After they go down, I might do a little bit more. That's not a great fit for everybody. And even for myself, I've had to dial that back some because it used to be like, I'll schedule and I do everything on scheduling. Like I'll schedule myself into 16 hours. Like I'll just do that. And yeah, so that's not a way to run your business or run your life. And I think, coming out of the gates and doing a lot of that for 6 months, it's like, oh, this is not sustainable for me. So, everybody talks about balance. We've even mentioned it a couple of times on this call. I think of it more in terms of harmony is the word that I like to use because you're never going to like balance to me is an equation. We talk about the art and the science of hiring, right? The art and the science of figuring out how you're going to live your life and deal with stress. If you're balancing something, you've got this weight on this piece of the scale and this weight on this piece of the scale. You're trying to find something that's close to the middle. I think about it like when my business really needs me, I've got proposals out, or I've got a client on a deadline, or I've got a crisis. Hell yeah, I'm going to be involved in that. But
Right.
like when it's not that, I've also got places where it's like, I'm going to play golf today. My clients don't have anything going on, and I've already worked 40 hours this week, or even if I've only worked 20 hours that
Right.
week, like I'm not tracking. I am
Mm-hmm.
tracking time, but I'm not beholden to it. I think the way that I was in large agency. So um, and finding those spots where it's like, God damn, I'm tired. I just like I'm gonna stay home and I'm gonna take a nap this afternoon, or I'm gonna play golf or do something else to like get my mind off of work. Um, I wish that I had learned earlier in my career um, how to like control that for myself. And I think a lot of people within agencies still struggle with that as much as they might be working for a place that's like, hey, we're going to treat you like adults. Not everybody means it probably in the way that Dave is describing it. And that's a real tricky thing too. It's like I want to do well, but I also know that there are these expectations of me. So finding that harmony anyway for me has just been like a real big mental and life shift.
Yeah, just to play off what you're saying, Evan, there's generally two sweeping statements that I don't believe when I hear them. One is I've nailed work-life balance. Like, have you?
Right.
Because I'm still learning, right? And the other is I've nailed my AI strategy because that's also is another LinkedIn Live, right? Dustin, another day to talk about strategy. But I think those are the two things I'm hearing that I question.
Hmm.
Uh, but even to your point, Evan, there's the founder mentality, right? And that's where you have to think like, how am I showing up for my team? Right? I'm looking at a couple of key things. And we'll cover for you. And what does that mean? And then, really living by, like, I think upholding a couple of key things. Like one is just walking the walk, right? When we think about our culture and making sure like I'm upholding what I'm telling the teams to do. Another, the second one is don't create a false sense of urgency. And I think something
Oh,
to
yes.
maybe like resonates with all of us, right? And that's the difference. Like sometimes there are things where it is a crisis, it is urgent. We need to jump on it. We need to
Mhm.
come together as a team, even as Dave was saying, but don't create a false sense of urgency because I think that is what starts to create a negative culture. The third is just encourage everyone to be accountable to what their role is and those responsibilities, but you need to give them clarity. Like, what are my roles and responsibilities? And then the fourth that I've certainly learned over time is to think about taking off before you're burnt out, right? Especially as a founder, you got to catch yourself. Dustin, you might be like getting close to this trap. Like, just the more you can also like instill that in your team. If you had like a busy season, like I was
Right.
just at Cannes Lion, I know I was doing like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Mhm.
nonstop meetings. So the week after that, it actually just lined up where we do at Kite Hill, we do a lot of great wellness perks, and we have a full wellness week where the whole agency is closed. We tell our clients that we're going to be closed. So I had that full week off. Of course, I checked in a little bit on the side, but maybe my team was fully off. And then, so, it kind of gave me that opportunity to spend time with my daughter, to go out to Connecticut, to kind of get that
Yep.
breath of fresh air that I needed right after a busy season to then come back and say, like, all right, second half, let's
Right.
go.
Yeah, and jumping off that, going back to what Evan said, I like that term harmony. It is
Yeah.
important. And as I think it's important to understand it's not a question of like want. How do we find people who want to be on a call at 9 p.m. at night? It's not that, but it's understanding that certain clients that we have, I mean, that's their hours or that's just part of it. But it comes down to making sure that you're staffing it appropriately and you have insight into, well, make sure that the person who's on that account isn't also on another one that has to do early morning calls along those lines and making sure that
Right.
when you know that there's, but we've done a lot of work with around America 250, and we just had a big push clearly
Wow.
on July 3rd and July 4th. So we were
Right.
traveling a lot ultimately. So, I mean, when that project ultimately comes to an end, whenever that is, it's not enough to say like, all right, who is working on that account? It's like, all right, these three people now have time, their life back again. Let's put them on something new right away. It's
Right.
understanding like, hey, they just went through a sprint. They were working all hours. They were traveling ultimately. They
Mhm.
need time to kind of rest or recover ultimately. Let's let them, get back into it. Congratulate them on the great work that they did ultimately, but not just look as that there's just some kind of robot that then gets plugged into something new right away. And I think that just comes down to understanding people's bandwidth, understanding team
Mhm.
structures, understanding mental health, and making sure that that's an integral part of your culture.
Yeah, I think, it even you made it such a great point, Dave, about making sure it's an integral part of your culture and all the things that you can do. I did want to come back to an earlier point. I love that you asked the question when you're thinking about building the team, just about your first job. I think it's such a
Mhm.
good one. And even I think we can build on that, maybe even get some like questions in the comments, like other things that other people ask when
Yeah.
they're looking to hire folks. And you know what I love asking is, everyone will tell you when you're in an interview how things go right and a lot of the wins,
Right.
and you want to hear about those great wins and those skills. But I love asking, like, how did you respond when a client program didn't go the way you wanted it to, right? Tell
Right.
me when the results weren't there, when the client wasn't
Mhm.
happy, like what was your response? I think that's a great question. And another great one, kind of in this context, is how do you respond to stress? And I think that just really tells you a lot about like how do you approach things, how do you manage things, how do
Mhm.
you manage your team?
Well, and self-awareness is really important, right? So we, as I mentioned earlier, we have one of our back-end people's out this week, and so is our director of content. And then next week, our director of content and our main writer are out. But there's going to be a lot more stress on me. Um, And so we were doing a lot of vacation in July and August. And I caught myself yesterday in our weekly team meeting. I'm taking as much of a, I'm not gonna say hands off, but I'm trying to run the company and let everyone run their accounts and do their job. I hired adults. I tell them day one they can tell me I'm wrong, and we move on with our lives. But I caught myself acting like old Dustin, where I was telling everyone what to do. So I sent a team-wide email and said, with everyone on vacation, with a lot of people on vacation, it was still a small team, you might see the Dustin characteristic of trying to control everything happening. If I'm doing that with you, tell me even in front of everybody else. So I think that self-awareness component is really important because when I've been asked in interviews, what do you think is your greatest weakness? And I remember I think I didn't get the job because I was too honest or too frank, if you will. Should always be honest, perhaps not as frank as I am or as verbose. But I think it's a really good point, Tiffany, as you get into how somebody thinks and processes themselves. Because what I always ask before an interview, I ask a series of questions by email. And one is, what are your three best soft strengths? Your three best hard strengths? And what is your biggest weakness professionally? And how they answer that tells us a lot of information about how they think about themselves and the value they can bring to us. It also gives us the ability to find the right seat for them on the bus. All right, we have about 10 minutes, so we haven't really gotten to what I actually wanted to talk about from the start when I actually first thought of this, which was how to handle the uncertainty part of PR, because that is, to me, that's the biggest killer. Again, PR, not the ER, but when you're in a lot of other industries, there's certainty. My father was a roofing contractor. First job, second job, really, because I shoveled manure for a farm, but lugging shingles onto a roof. It's stressful. There's ladders. There's potential of falling. But when you're off the job, you're done till the next day. And you know exactly what you need to do. Tear it off, put it on the ground, put it back in the truck, put the shingle on. Now it's in place. There's a concreteness to it. There's a lack of concreteness in PR. So I'd love for everyone to kind of wrap up on a couple of minutes on how you personally have reduced what Evan called the unnecessary stress. Because I think it's also important that people who are watching don't just look to their boss and say, you have to teach me, but that we also take personal responsibility. So I'll start with the fact that a lot of our clients are on a 30-day turning basis, right? We want to achieve this month, this month, because we're doing a lot of project-based work. It's not a 12-month campaign where we needed 35 placements and it doesn't matter when they happen. So for me, not looking over my team's shoulders, trusting my team to accomplish the job has vastly reduced my stress and reduced theirs because they know that I'm not looking over their shoulder. Not checking my emails as much has reduced my stress level. Being, to Evan's point about harmony, which I think is fantastic. Some days I have the time to go for a swim. I don't like swimming, but going for a swim and not worrying about the clock for 20 minutes is a big win for me. And not having to worry about, I know I have an hour, it's only going to take me 47 minutes. I have plenty of leeway. Doing those concrete things has allowed me to remind myself that no one's going to die if the op-ed gets sent out a little late. So Tiffany, if you want to go next, then Dave, and then Evan.
Sure. We can also answer the question of what was our first job as we go around. So mine was working in an ice cream parlor at the Jersey Shore. And I feel like, Dustin, to your point, it's a very different kind of environment, right? But I did management skills since I was like the first manager that was like promoted as a part of that. When it comes to managing clients, very different than someone that's ordering a sundae at an ice cream parlor, someone that is looking for our campaign. So I think a couple things, a couple pieces of advice that I can offer on this. One is setting KPIs. So in the beginning of the relationship, you're talking to clients, you're looking at like how do we expect this to go? What should our performance be? Another one is always encouraging the team to manage client expectations throughout the process. So, even in the picture, when you're first learning about a client, you might have a certain understanding of what success can look like, what we want success to look like. That might look vastly different from when you start to work through the campaign. That's okay, as long as you're having open communications, you're managing client expectations, you are helping the client pivot with you. So that's a big part of it. And then another kind of agency-wide and industry push, which I think is great, is we've talked a lot about what we do in the context of PR, mainly, I think, with the understanding or through the lens of media relations, which is a big part of what we do. And even thanks to AEO and AI visibility, kind of back to a golden era of the importance of earned media right now. But in reality, we've also done a big push to move towards integrated communications. We even rebranded Kite Hill to drop PR to move towards integrated communications 2 years ago. And a lot of that means that the work we're doing for campaigns or integrated comms campaigns across channels, and that includes LinkedIn. We're doing a lot of B2B. That might include some elements of working with clients on events and event activation. So there's multiple elements of, how do we shape a bigger point of success that isn't just about that one-off media hit? And I think that's the opportunity, right? To kind of think about what are the stories that we have? How can we tell those stories across channel? What does that mean for the campaign? Because you're exactly right. If the client is only expecting that one big hit and that one publication, that's dangerous territory that you want to move out of
Huge,
and
massively
take them into a
dangerous.
different direction, right? And that's
Yes.
our opportunity, right? That's the challenge
Yeah.
and the opportunity of the work that we do.
Right. Those are really good points, and I'm glad you talked about setting expectations because we think there's two secret sauces, not secret, but sauces that we focus on. One is the actual PR outcome of media relations, but the other part is a seamless process. That is absolutely critical to success for us because we're working on so many projects. So setting those expectations is critical. Otherwise, you have clients that have scope creep day one. Super important. Dave?
Uh, yeah, so on the first job thing, I'm a Rhode Island guy, so proud headquarters of CVS Pharmacy. So I was working at a CVS pharmacy, 24-hour CVS pharmacy. So I was doing, cash register. They actually had me try to develop film for a couple of days. That didn't go well. When you actually developed film, we actually
What
had
is
to do
what is developing film? What does that mean? I don't know this term.
photos. Seriously, like photos. Oh,
I'm
like, all
kidding.
right, because maybe I don't know.
Dave, we're the same age almost. Oh, come on.
So, yeah, so that was a fun job. But just in terms of the stress, so this might sound very basic, but it took me a while to figure this out. So in the PR space, you strive so hard to get clients and secure clients. And you think that while you're servicing clients, if they keep coming back to you and they're saying, "Hey, well, I'm on a lot of calls with them, I'm doing a lot of deliverables for them, everything must be going well." And there are other times where you might have a client on retainer and you're not hearing as much from them, and you might be reluctant to like remind them that you're there or be like, "Hey, how are things going?" Sometimes you're just like, "I don't
Mhm.
want to do anything to rock the boat," where they'll let me know if things aren't going well, or something along those lines. But it created so much stress and anxiety, I think, of it to be like,
Yes.
are we doing enough? Are we doing a good
Mhm.
job on the stuff that we're doing? And I've
Right.
learned that the only way to ultimately alleviate that is to just ask them,
Sure.
how are we doing? How am I doing? How can I be creating more value for you instead of just hoping that the products that I'm sending across are good enough, or that, they know that I'm here when they need me, type of a thing. Maybe sometimes you're like, "Hey, it's great. We don't need you right now, but it's great that we have you, that we're going to do a project a month from now. Thanks for checking in," type of a thing. It's
Mhm.
just helped me just ease my mind so much by just
Yeah.
asking the question every couple of weeks. Like, how am I doing?
Yeah.
How are we doing as a firm? How's the team doing? What else? What more do you need? What do you need less of? Not just when the contract renewal comes up, but these kind of constant check-ins to do that, I think has been a great way, because then you know where you stand for good or worse ultimately, and it just relieves so
Yeah.
much of the stress when you're laying in bed at night or just wondering if this client's going to be around a month from
That's
now. It's have those real conversations, which again doesn't sound like revolutionary, but once you're in that space, you don't think to do it out of just intimidation or just not and to lose what you have, type
it.
of thing. It's just being exposed,
That's a good
being
point.
vulnerable a little bit with your client, I think ultimately make how am I doing type of a
Well,
thing.
the other
Yeah.
thing too, and again, making my rule for the fourth time, but I promise it's a rule. I promise. Is we're working with a client in the financial space, and an op-ed we're working with the CFO, with the VP of Client Relations, is a lot of their clients don't want to call them. Oh, I'm running a little short on cash this month. And he said the piece focuses on it's okay to call us and say, hey, I need a little bit of breathing space, or can I only pay 80% of it this month? But when you don't tell us, then you hide it and you do it over here, and suddenly 3, 4, 6 months later, so a crisis happens. Now you're doomed. Now we're putting liens on everything. Now you're firing people. Whereas you've called us up front and had the conversation, it's a conversation. And I think that's what you're talking about here is you build that trust. So if a campaign doesn't go as well, they know you tried hard and they know you did your best and you're able to explain the realities of PR. I think it's a great point and not basic at all. Evan, let's wrap us up.
Yeah, I think my thing about stress is that not all of it is the same. Some of it you can see coming, and some of it kind of blindsides you. And as I've gone further and further in my career and gained more experience, and I'm sure the others will agree, you understand better what is coming down the pipe and what you should be prepared for, and the things that are probably going to stress you out anyway. Client has a launch, or you've got it's the end of the month or the end of the quarter, or your contract's up, whatever. Like those things are going to be stressful, I think, no matter what you do. But putting that in a box where you can, like, one of our core values is preparation and anticipation. And to the extent that you can do that ahead of those moments that you see coming, and be able to get rid of so much stress. And then the other part of it is the unexpected stuff. There are 220 or 230 working days in a year. Like, I would expect in our industry, at least half of those, you're going to have something pop up out of the blue that you're going to need to deal with, and probably more than half. So that's just part of it. And everybody talks about, like, oh, I love PR because not every day is the same. I'm one of those people. I've said that a million times. But I also know that in order for me to feel like I have less stressors in my day, scheduling, planning, anticipating, preparing, doing all of those things to the full extent that I feel like is going to get me ready for the next day or the next week or the next assignment. Yeah, I'm going to do those things. But then, I like the variety. I'm glad that it's not preparing for the same thing over and over and over again. And that's why I've been in agency for as long as I have, and that's why I'm continuing with it on my own. But yeah, think that understanding that not all stress is the same has been a really key thing for me.
Well, I think that wraps us up. Tiffany, Dave, Evan, this was a blast. I know I interrupted a little more than I usually do, but I didn't expect half the stuff that was mentioned. Our prep call gave me a good starting point, but this was great. I've actually went back to one of my colleagues and asked her to take this show, which we use and promote in other ways, but I asked her to put this into Claude and see what it comes up with, because I know there's 4 or 5 things I'm going to take here and run with. So thanks for the free lessons. I appreciate them.
I'll take that transcript too if you got it.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for organizing,
All
Dustin.
right, folks. This was fun. Thanks a lot. Appreciate
Yeah.
y'all.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Take care.